It's me how it do you.
Here, let's do one more. But
Yep,
I
yep.
have this side of your hair.
Oh yeah. You vertical.
On the surface, Jordan Blue's 2025 America's Got Talent audition looked like the classic talent show miracle. A young man walks onto the stage, grips the microphone, and within seconds, the entire studio goes silent. His voice rises through Breakeven by the script, the crowd leans in, and the judges' faces slowly soften from curiosity to shock. By the time he hits the final note, people are on their feet. Moments later, golden confetti rains from the ceiling, capturing the kind of clip that gets replayed endlessly on social media. Viewers at home saw a new star seemingly appear out of nowhere, a feel-good story of raw talent finally discovered. But as we've learned by piecing together his past, that glittering 2-minute performance was not the beginning of anything. It was the latest chapter in a long and bruising fight for survival. The world saw a rising star, but Jordan knew they were looking at someone who had already gone to war with himself. Someone who had nearly lost that battle more than once. His dream that night wasn't just to impress judges. It was to finally transform years of chaos, pain, and near disaster into something his son, his grandfather, and ultimately he himself could be proud of. Jordan's story begins in New Orleans, a city famous for its music, improvisation, and freedom. Yet inside his family home, the atmosphere was very different. His mother worked as a police officer, his father as a lawyer. Two professions built on rules, order, and authority. To many people, that sounds like the perfect foundation. A stable home, disciplined parents, and a clear path toward a respectable future. But in his own retellings, Jordan describes those years as tight, rigid, and suffocating. To many people, that sounds like the perfect foundation. A stable home, disciplined parents, and a clear path toward a respectable future. But in his own retellings, Jordan describes those years as tight, rigid, and suffocating. Expectations were high, mistakes were costly, and there was little room to drift, experiment, or fail. Later, on the AGT stage, he turned that tension into a joke. My mom was a cop, my dad was a lawyer, so of course I became a rebel. The line drew laughter. But if you listen closely, there's more than comedy there. His rebellion wasn't just teenage attitude or a phase he would eventually grow out of. It was his clumsy way of pushing back against a world where he never felt like he truly fit. By the time he reached high school, that mismatch between who he was and who he was expected to be had already started tearing at the seams of his life. In his early teens, Jordan's internal battle began spilling into his everyday life. What started as small acts of defiance, skipping class, ignoring rules, hanging out with people his parents didn't approve of, slowly escalated. He drifted further from his family, spending less time at home and more time with peers who offered freedom, but not guidance. School became an afterthought. According to accounts we've reconstructed, he began missing classes regularly, slipping into a pattern of late nights, parties, and increasingly risky decisions. Alcohol entered the picture, at first as a social crutch, then as an all-purpose escape valve. Each new choice that felt like liberation in the moment actually pulled him deeper into trouble. At 16, the system finally pushed back. He was expelled. While his classmates were thinking about exams, college, and prom, Jordan found himself outside the structure entirely. A teenager with no timetable, no safety net, and very little sense of where to go next. In that vacuum, the urges to numb out and run away from his own thoughts only grew stronger, setting the stage for the darkest chapter of his young life. By his late teens, the spiral had accelerated. Jordan has since spoken about a night when the mix of pain, substances, and exhaustion reached a breaking point. At 18, he OD'd. There were no TV crews there, no urgent headlines, no trending hashtags. Just a young man whose body was suddenly very close to shutting down. For a brief, terrifying window, his life, the same life that would one day move millions on television, almost stopped in a room no one would ever see. He survived, but something fundamental shifted. That near-fatal collapse became a blaring alarm he could no longer ignore. It forced him to confront not just the path he was on, but the people who would be left to mourn him if he didn't make it. In the aftermath, one figure stepped forward as a turning point: his grandfather, John. Instead of choosing anger or judgment, John opened his door. He offered Jordan something he hadn't felt in a long time, a place where he wasn't a problem to fix, but a person who needed rebuilding. That decision, simple on the surface, set the foundation for everything that came next. From the street, John's house looked ordinary. Inside, it was a quiet museum of sound. Old records lined the walls. Vintage speakers hummed with the soft crackle of blues, gospel, and soul. Here, Jordan wasn't lectured. He was invited to listen. His grandfather didn't just play songs. He told him what those songs had carried people through: heartbreak, war, poverty, and loss. For the first time, Jordan began to see his own wounds reflected in something bigger than himself. The melodies felt like they understood him in ways words hadn't. Soon, listening wasn't enough. He started to sing along. At church, his voice rose through stained glass and over wooden pews, turning pain into something almost sacred. On small school theater stages, he stepped into characters and found a form of freedom he had never known in his own skin. The applause was modest, the venues small, but the impact on him was enormous. Still, reality never fully loosened its grip. Bills had to be paid, so he took whatever work he could find. Music, at that point, still felt too fragile to lean on completely.
But the seed had been planted. Maybe his voice was more than a hobby. Maybe it was his way out. Then COVID-19 hit. The stages closed, the streets emptied, and the world went quiet. For many, that silence was suffocating. For Jordan, it became a strange kind of opening. With live performances on hold, he turned inward and began writing. The songs that emerged were not polished radio singles. They were raw, unfiltered reflections of addiction, confusion, faith, fear, and survival. He recorded covers and originals in simple setups and posted them online. Expectations were low. The point was expression, not numbers. But people started to find him. Viewers weren't just impressed by his vocal ability, they believed him. There was a fragile honesty in his tone that cut through the noise of heavily produced content. His TikTok and Instagram followings grew, not in a single viral explosion, but through steady, organic connection. In 2022, he took a tentative step toward mainstream exposure by auditioning for American Idol Season 20 via Zoom. Singing to a laptop in a quiet room, he poured himself into the performance. He didn't make it far, and the audition never aired. For many, that would have been the end. For Jordan, it was proof that the door was at least cracking open. What came next was a decision that many would consider reckless, but for Jordan, it felt necessary. He walked away from what little conventional stability he had and took his voice to one of the most unpredictable stages in America, Bourbon Street in New Orleans. The Strip is famous for its neon lights, rowdy crowds, and relentless noise, not exactly an easy setting for a serious singer. But Jordan set up anyway, with nothing more than a portable speaker, a microphone, and determination. He sang as bars blasted bass behind him, as tourists stumbled by with plastic cups in hand, as beads flew overhead. He stayed until his throat burned, until late hours, until police told him to pack it up. Every song had a purpose: diapers for his son Jax, gas money for the long drive from Baton Rouge, rent to keep a roof overhead. At this stage, he wasn't chasing recognition. He was using the only asset he truly trusted, his voice, to keep his family afloat. But those streets had a darker side too. In January 2025, an attack rocked the very block where he often performed. By sheer chance, he wasn't there that night. He was sick at home. The realization that the place where he'd been pouring out his heart could just as easily have been where his life ended forced him to reconsider everything. That brush with danger became a catalyst. By the time auditions opened for America's Got Talent in May 2025, Jordan knew exactly why he wanted to be there. It wasn't for a trophy to display on a shelf. It was for his son's future, for his grandfather's faith in him, then for the chance to turn survival into purpose. Standing under the harsh studio lights, he chose Breakeven, a song many viewers already knew. But in his hands, the lyrics about heartbreak and imbalance took on a broader meaning. How do you keep going when life has broken you more than once? Witnesses describe his voice as initially shaky, then increasingly powerful as he sank into the performance. The judges felt it. Sofia Vergara called him a rock star. Heidi Klum said he had made the song completely his own. Simon Cowell singled out the authenticity of his emotion. Then came Howie Mandel, who appeared visibly moved before slamming the golden buzzer. Golden confetti exploded from above as Jordan dropped to his knees, clutching the pieces like proof that all the pain had led somewhere. On a phone screen, his grandfather John watched in real time as the world finally recognized what he'd seen years earlier. The golden buzzer didn't bring an end to struggle. It simply changed its setting. In the quarterfinals, Jordan returned to the AGT stage to perform Biblical by Callum Scott. On TV, viewers saw a slightly more strained version of the singer they had fallen in love with weeks earlier. What they didn't see, according to accounts from behind the scenes, was how sick he was that night. Jordan was reportedly battling severe food poisoning, weakened and barely able to stand between rehearsals.
Producers offered him a safety net. If he couldn't perform, they could use a pre-recorded rehearsal take instead. He said no. Determined to show up live, he walked onto the stage anyway, even as his body protested. The performance wasn't technically perfect. Some notes wavered, some phrases landed heavier than intended. But the emotion was undeniable. He didn't sound like a flawless pop product. He sounded like a human being hanging on. That raw honesty carried him through to the next round. For many viewers, that night reframed how they saw him. Jordan Blue wasn't a contestant groomed for the spotlight. He was someone who had fought for every inch of ground he'd gained, and was still fighting, even with a national audience watching. Away from the AGT stage, Jordan's digital footprint shows a picture of an artist who has been building community long before prime time found him. Hundreds of thousands follow him on TikTok, tens of thousands on Instagram. They don't just tune in for impressive riffs or trending covers. They show up for his honesty. In live streams, he talks openly about mental health, grief, and the constant pressure of being a young father still trying to understand himself. He admits there were nights he almost gave up completely. He shares memories that many public figures would rather hide. That vulnerability has become part of his power.
He dreams of creating a music festival centered on mental health awareness, turning his platform into a space for healing and solidarity. Financially, estimates suggest his net worth sits somewhere around $100,000, modest by entertainment standards. But that number has little to do with the true value of what he does. When Jordan Blue sings, you are not just hearing a technically good voice. You are hearing near overdoses, bathroom breakdowns, chaotic Bourbon Street nights, a grandfather's quiet love, and a small boy named Jax who became his reason to fight. In a world that often treats brokenness as something to hide, his story poses a different idea. What if our broken pieces aren't the end of our song, but the start of it?